What's up, 49er fans? I'm Jason Aponte. That's Brian Peacock of Locked On 49ers. And we're going to be talking OTA, OTAs. Not sure if that's plural or not. That's been a talking point. And we'll talk about how important this season is for the 49ers. Stick around. Welcome, everybody. Let's go, Niners. My name is Jason Aponte. I'm Jason Aponte. That's Brian Peacock of Locked On 49ers. Today is Tuesday. Today is the first OTA session that was available to the media. But before we get into all that, Brian, how are you, man? It's good to see you.
I'm doing great. I got to talk to whoever your graphic designer is. It says Aponte and Peacock instead of Peacock and Aponte. I don't know who approved that name first. No, I'm pumped for this. I hope we do it a lot. I think we could probably make it a weekly thing here. I love talking ball with you, and I'm just pumped anytime the players are actually on the field. We get to talk about somewhat real ball, even though it is kind of fictitious ball at this point still.
Right, 100%. We can definitely make this a weekly show, and I think it'll be great, for the fans and for us and everything. But let's just start right there. What realistically can we learn from organized team activities with no pads, voluntary? Is it just hype because there's actual footballs being thrown, or are there things that we can actually take away from these sessions?
There's the biggest takeaways as far as voluntary OTA practices go, and I think it feels weird saying OTA and not OTAs, but it's kind of like RBI in baseball.
Right.
They're not. It's not RBIs. It's
Right.
it's RSBI. Is it OTA? I don't know, but it's organized team activities. But I guess if you're referring to it as an OTA, then it is an OTA plural, so it's OTAs still. I don't know. I need my English majors to help me out with that one. But when it comes to OTAs and organized team activities, who's there and who's not is probably the most important thing. And you just want the young guys, the new guys, to not fall on their face. There's always the famous stories, and I hear from guys like Matt Barrows and some of the longtime beat writers that were around and watching practices when AJ Jenkins was drafted. And they look around and they're like, this guy can't stay on his feet. Like, he's just getting bumped off of the ball, and he looks terrible. And you don't want your young players to look like that. And then where guys are lining up, right, is a player that you drafted on the offensive line. Is he playing offensive tackle, or is he playing guard? Is he playing left side or right side? Is Ricky Pearsall taking reps behind Debo, or is he making up for the opportunity of Juwan Jennings and Brandon Ayuk not being at practice? And is he lining up at X? Is he lining up more in the slot? And so I think those are the things you can take away more than how great a guy looks and how open a wide receiver is getting, just because their heads are spinning and they're still learning where they need to be and where they need to line up and how the team wants to huddle and everything that a rookie has to learn. I think one of the biggest quotes of the day was from Jair Brown, talking about how much football and how tired he was and how crazy long the season was for him as a rookie. And look, as a rookie, not only did he play a longer NFL season, but you go through the draft process and you have no time off there and you're working out. You go straight from the draft into rookie mini camp and you get almost no rest time. And then the Niners are a Super Bowl team, so you're playing 20 games, twice as much as you would have in a college season. So I think that's an underrated aspect of what these rookies are going through. Their heads are spinning and they're probably pretty exhausted at some point.
Yeah, and it's good that you brought up who was there, because obviously Nick Bosa being there, it kind of feels like he's making up for not being at training camp, obviously due to a contract dispute, but he wanted to get out there. I think Nick is seeing the departure of Eric Armstead, wanting to fill in that leadership role, and I think he's starting to try to take that on. That's just, again, a complete assumption, just from the outside looking in. But you did mention that Brandon Ayuk wasn't there. I don't think that we would expect him there amidst the contract extension thing. By the way, guys, I'm still not panicked. June 2nd, there's a ton of money that is about to open up, which I'm sure will give them the runway to get this thing done. But Ricky Pearsall is actually lining up where Brandon Ayuk normally would, with Debo Samuel there, who is apparently, Brian, in the best shape of his life right now. And that's going to be something that we're going to go back to and joke
I
about a
think it's
little bit.
just wearing number one probably takes at least 5 pounds off your frame, right? But
Right.
you don't want to be the guy who was like a defensive lineman wearing a single digit number, and the number just gets lost on your back too. So I know Debo's a wide back, but you don't want that back to get too wide if you're going to be wearing number one. I think it can be a little slimming, but and Kyle Shanahan talks about that, but I think it could also look a little weird if you're not in the right shape. So I had a feeling Debo would want to be one of the best shape of your life guys this offseason.
100%. And Samuel Sr. is slimming a little bit too on the back, right? The senior part just makes it just a little bit more slimming, even though that's not generally how it goes, right?
Yeah, the longer name, and then so it makes it kind of look like more of a Y shaped back, a little V
Right.
shape going on with the longer name, smaller number.
Yeah, and obviously Debo's going to come out in all the talks about being traded, all those things. And again, we're just putting pieces together. You draft two receivers. Sounds like there's a way for the 49ers to move off of Debo Samuel if they wanted to and save a bunch of money, which would clear the runway, obviously, to pay Brock Purdy as well. But he's essentially in a contract year, right? Like I think he wants to get out there and show everyone that he is still that guy. I don't know if he's that guy in 2021 where he just had the 49ers in his complete backpack, which I that's one of the most stunning seasons I've ever seen from an offensive player, let alone a 49er. But he is sort of playing a little bit for his reputation in terms of if I do have a team next year, I'm going to want to talk extra money and everything as well too. So this is a little bit of a contract season essentially for Debo Samuel as well.
There's a lot of guys playing for a contract. Juwan Jennings didn't sign his restricted free agent tender yet. And the draft has already come and gone. So there's not that second round compensation if he was to sign somewhere else. So that's a kind of a limbo situation that Juwan Jennings is in. He's playing for a new contract because he'll be an unrestricted free agent next offseason. Maybe it would be better for all parties if he gets traded. If Ricky Pearsall is going to take all of those reps and those targets away from him as a first round player. But then if you played out one more season, if you lose all of a sudden Debo and Juwan Jennings, now are you thin again at wide receiver? So someone like Jacob Cowie would have to step up, and you're probably diving into the draft or free agency again to bring in your own guys to complete the wide receiver group. So it's a wide receiver group that's really strong right now, but it's absolutely in flux. And who is earning the targets and who's getting paid, that's still, I think, really up in the air for all these guys over the next 12 calendar months.
100%. And I think obviously this is voluntary, and you'd like for everyone to be there. I will say this: I would have loved to have seen Jacob Cowan attend these sessions, right? Like again, we're talking about rookies and everything. To kind of hear that he wasn't there was a little bit of a shock, in my opinion, based on him trying to get himself acclimated. I definitely expect a lot from him because I loved him going through the draft process, but I for sure would have hoped to see Jacob Cowan there to kind of build on that rapport with Brock Purdy, who had nothing but glowing things to say about him in his press conference. But it would have been nice to see him out there as well, too, especially considering Juwan Jennings and Brandon Ayuk aren't there. And Ricky Pearsall is just sliding into the Ayuk thing. Again, you can't read too far into this because it is not mandatory. Guys are just, going to show up whenever they want. A mandatory mini camp is next month. But it would have been really nice to see Jacob Cowan there. That was something that I was just a little bit disappointed in.
Were there any reports as to why he was not there? A rookie not showing up to a voluntary OTA is kind of a red flag, unless, and it wasn't like he was injured and working out on the sides. From any reports I saw, like, you need every rep possible. You're trying to earn whatever role you can get. That was a little bit of a shocker that he wasn't there.
Yeah, that's concerning, right? Like a little bit because you need all of this time, and they're not doing any install. Obviously, there's no contact, and the NFL has placed rules on all these phases. But you would have liked to have seen Jacob Cowan get there and just build a little bit of rapport with Brock Purdy. But Brock Purdy did say that they have been working out a little bit, so hopefully that's good enough. But it would have been really nice to see him there as well too. It was a little bit of a shock, in my opinion, for him to not be there. But other people that weren't there. Drake Jackson is still not ready to go. Jake Brendel has knee arthritis. Talno Hufanga was working on the side field. Mooney Ward and George Kittle are recovering from off-season surgeries. Nothing really, anything that should be concerning. But I wanted to ask you, because I've been running with this bit on Twitter about this is the time during against air. Everyone's having the best camp of their life, or they're literally in the best shape of their life. And, we have the camp warriors. I remember Trent Sherfield a few years ago. They were like, oh, he looks like Antonio Brown because he's wearing 81. Who's your candidate to be in the best shape of his life and have the best camp ever?
Well, it's usually the fast guys, right? It's the guys that can run around and maybe get more opportunities than they would during a normal practice. And so I would have thought someone like Jacob Cowing could have been that perfect, like just waiting for that report. We're like, oh, Jacob Cowing actually looks better than first rounder Ricky Pearsall. He looks faster, because he's a little bit smaller, a little bit faster maybe, and has that opportunity, but he's not there. So it's definitely not him. I would say that when it comes to any who looks the best, linemen are usually going to get left out of that. So I don't know if a prospect that is maybe ready to play and is maybe someone where their skills are high, but they're third round draft pick, Dominic Pooney, he would be someone that I bet would look pretty good compared to other past young players, just because he's an older guy, 24 years old, played a lot of ball, but it's a little bit harder, especially with no contact, for linemen to stand out. So I don't know that it would be him. So I'm going to go with the second rounder, Renardo Green, as far as the young players go, as the guy who, competitive and shows up and people get really excited about the way he looks. And I would have said Cowing, but he's not there, so he can't be the guy.
I would have said Drake Jackson, because it just feels like they're getting ready to tell us that he's like hit the weights and he's attacked all of his off season and his recovery. I was just waiting for that to happen. And it's funny because Leonard Floyd got a lot of praise today from, I believe it was Matt Barrows or it was Matt Mayoko, one of them that was saying how well he played today and how he looked. But Drake Jackson, even contributing a little, only bolsters this defensive line, even if it does seem like the 49ers aren't necessarily counting on his jump or him to be a prime, I guess, contributor. So I think Drake Jackson's kind of interesting because it goes from your expectations are down now from where he was drafted to, hey, man, if we can just get reps out of him, we can get snaps out of him, and he can start pressuring the quarterback, starts to make this defensive line look a lot more scary if he's able to even contribute a little.
Drake Jackson's a guy whose weight can fluctuate too. So I think he could be one of those players where it's like, oh, he looks like he's 275 pounds, looks a little thick, a little too big. Or he comes in like, man, he is 260. He is rocked up. He's lean and he's mean. But the fact that he's hurt and he's not practicing, Cam Latu, those are another couple of names that it's like, you better get your career off the ground before you're somewhere else and you don't have a career anymore. Those are two. It's not, I don't think that important for the 49ers necessarily with those two players, but for those two players, I think this year is super important for those guys, and they've got to get on the field first before they can start to earn some sort of a role. Because Kyle Shanahan's comments about Cam Latu, and he was asked if he was going to come in as the tight end too, and he
said
no, he's got to play first. It's like, geez, okay. That was a quick doghouse for Cam Latu. And so you got to get on the field first before you can get out of that doghouse. So yeah, I would say right now, if you're looking at stock down, it's just guys that aren't there and can't compete. So, Cowing, where are you, dude? Not necessarily so much Juwan Jennings and Ayuk, because they're in a different situation, but Drake Jackson and Cam Latu, like, they need to get healthy. They need to get on the field and prove that they're NFL football players.
Yeah, and I think this is an important time because I think that this camp has a few players on the clock. And it's crazy because Cam Latu hasn't even taken an NFL snap yet. And I feel like he's one of those players. I think this is an important camp for Ambry Thomas, given all of the people that they brought in at this secondary position. I think this is a huge camp for Danny Gray. And I think it's a huge camp for Drake Jackson. All these guys have to start contributing in some way, even if it's just getting on the field a little. So it's going to be interesting how this 53-man roster shakes out, because the 49ers are clearly fine with having Chris Conley around as a number 5, number 6 guy, because he's actually played in the NFL. But then when you look at the 2 receivers they drafted and who else they'll have, starts to become a numbers game. And Danny Gray, you've really got to really put some things out there to make it seem like you belong on this roster. And I think that's for him, for Jackson, for Latu, and I think for Ambry Thomas, who is just looking at overall competition at the cornerback position.
The competition is going to be fierce on this roster, and we know who most of the contributors are. And when it comes to the Danny Grays of the world, and it comes to the players like Cam Latu and Drake Jackson, and those guys that haven't really gotten a foothold in the NFL. I mean, OTAs are invaluable, and they don't have that right now for some of those guys. And when you go forward, veterans aren't going to give up their roster spots. When you're Danny Gray, not only do you have now another first round draft pick and a fourth round draft pick, and guys that might be taking your exact spot and your exact role on the roster. If you're Danny Gray, you're also looking at Chris Conley and going, now wait a second, this is this guy who's just as fast as me, and he's bigger than me, and he's better on special teams, and he's got a foothold in the office, and he's been around, and he's a veteran, and he knows what to do. So it gets really, really difficult for these guys to even have an opportunity to start competing, let alone go win a role on a football team. So that's how fleeting things are in the NFL for some of these guys. And you have to take every single opportunity you have, and you don't just keep getting years and years and years to figure it out.
One of your favorite positions in football is the running back position. And obviously I'm being funny because of the way that Brian values the position, paying them, wholly different thing. But I am a little I'm not concerned. I'm actually want to keep an eye on how this running back room is going to shake out, because Jordan Mason, it seems like they're just resigned to having him in mop-up duty, but as a good special teamer, and I think they really like him there. Christian McCaffrey has been taking every single snap. And I don't want to put it out in the world or anything like that, but he's been very lucky to continue to stay healthy with the beating that he takes and how much he's on the field. You draft Isaac Guerendo. You don't know what's going to happen with Elijah Mitchell, who possibly can't stay on the field. I'm really interested to see if there is some sort of split, if there is a little bit of a change. I know for a fact we're going to see Christian McCaffrey for 95, 97% of the snaps. But maybe do you dial that back a little bit when you have somebody as explosive as Isaac Guerendo, who kind of fills the role of that home run hitter they've been missing since Raheem Mostert left?
And nobody else plays except for Christian McCaffrey. Right. When he leaves the field, he's the running backs coach, right? He says, one play, guys. He runs off the field. Hey, Elijah Mitchell, have fun with one snap because I'm coming back on the field, right? It's not like the coach saying you're in, you're out. Christian McCaffrey says you get one, guys. And so there's not enough snaps already to go around for any of the other running backs. I think at some point, Kyle Shanahan has to kind of say, hey, Christian, we're gonna start figuring out how to limit the load on your body, because it's just he's a human being, and he might be part cyborg, but he's still a human being, and he plays a position that's like, look, he's touched the ball more times than anybody in the NFL the last 2 years. He's played 40 football games the last 2 years, and he's a running back, and he's approaching age 30. Like, that's a bad combination of things for someone to stay healthy. Now, I think the 49ers will be fine running the ball, and that's kind of the whole running back value thing. And I want to be clear. I just want everybody to know out there, I don't dislike running backs. I love running backs. I wish running backs were more valuable. They're just kind of not. And Christian McCaffrey has proven to be the most valuable running back in the league, worth the trade that I was skeptical about when the 49ers traded for him. I think, with the whole Lance and the McCaffrey trades, one worked out, one didn't. I think we are seeing like a little gap in talent that the 49ers have had some trouble finding: defensive linemen, offensive tackles, those things. And so team building, it has hurt them. And usually it's a 2-3 year delay from when you miss out on those picks to where you start to see it on the field. But we're starting to see that. And you go through the draft process and you're like, man, it's hard to find a tackle, hard to find a corner, hard to find, deep stud pass rushers. And if you don't do it in the first round, well, it's a lot of guards and tight ends and slot guys and interior players from there on out in drafts. And so I think the 49ers will see some impact from that, even though their roster is so good. But man, Christian McCaffrey, like, at some point you have to either limit his touches or just use him until he's toast, right? And just grind him into a fine powder, because that's what's going to happen. And that's what happens to running backs in the NFL. And I would actually like, with Christian McCaffrey, to see him become the wide back, because he costs half as much as Deebo Samuel. And if you want to talk about value, well, now you're cooking. Okay. If you give Deebo Samuel's role partially to Christian McCaffrey, and maybe more on the back and less on the wide, but still a little bit, a softer landing for him as far as on his body and the usage and the tread on his tires start giving some of the, so a bigger share of the targets after Debo's gone, split him out wide more often, put him in the slot more often, and have someone else take some of the carries off of his plate to make up for that. I think that would be the way to play the Christian McCaffrey thing going forward. And then actually you would have a little bit of value because he would be playing more of a wide receiver role, and then paying him as the highest paid running back in the league is still a lot less than you're paying a wide receiver like Deebo Samuel. So then the value starts to make a lot of sense to me. And you are saving him from the one biggest reason why running backs are less valuable in the NFL, and that's attrition. And we get to see some other really talented players carry the football, like Jordan Mason. Disrespectful how little he touches the ball, because he's really good. This guy's averaging 6 yards per carry in his NFL career. And obviously that would probably come down if he started carrying the ball 20 times a game. But he's a good player. And then you have Garendo, you have the undrafted rookie Cody Schrader, who I am not going to count out. I'm not going to count him in necessarily either. 5'8", 202. He lacks some physical ability, which is why he went undrafted. But the dude had 2,000 yards 1 year in college. I think 1,600 more yards last year. Started about 50 more games than Garendo did in college. But Garendo's obviously got the height and speed, and he can catch the ball out of the backfield as well. So it's a pretty stacked position group right now, considering that nobody ever touches the ball except for one guy.
Yeah, and whoever's left out in the cold always has a spot on a Philadelphia Eagles roster, right? Hello, TDP and Trey Sermon, right? So whoever's the odd man out, pack your bags. You're going to Philadelphia, pal. And then, again, obviously the elephant in the room is Elijah Mitchell's been productive when he's been on the field. He just hasn't been able to get on the field. And that's the frustrating part, especially from a value standpoint, where you drafted him and you have him later on. You took Ty Davis Price in the same draft, if I'm not mistaken, or Trey Sermon, if I'm not mistaken, and you end up with the guy who's on the back end, which kind of just illustrates your point about value and where you can find guys and everything. I think Elijah Mitchell does a great job of taking what's there and hitting the holes and understanding where he needs to go, but he's just got to get on the field. And again, I don't know how much of this is, obviously Christian McCaffrey doesn't want to come off the field. I don't know how much of this is Kyle Shanahan saying, I need the gravity that Christian McCaffrey causes on the field, because it's all over the tape. Even him going in motion, it pulls everybody away. All these things now are starting to get to a point where it's like, man, you've really gotten lucky with the fact that Christian McCaffrey's been able to be this good, this productive, and play all these games. And again, I'm not putting it out in the world. It's just you need more help there. It just can't be him 98, 99% of the time, because that's just not good math.
Yeah, at some point you just have to save him from himself. And I appreciate Christian McCaffrey. I like him even more than I liked him on the Panthers. When you get to see him up close, you see how he grinds. You see how much each carry, each play, each inch that he's fighting for on every play, how much that matters. And that's why he's so good. That's why he doesn't want to leave the field. He wants every touch. He wants every reception. But at some point, Kyle's the head coach. He has to save Christian McCaffrey from himself and just be smart with how many times he touches the football, because he's been pretty banged up at the end of both of these last two seasons, as expected. And to be honest with you, I've been shocked at how little he's had to leave the field and gotten forced to leave the field. But to be honest with you, as a running back, and look, knock on wood, because I love watching him play, he's due. And so you got to be smart with Christian McCaffrey. And that's one of the things that when you look at this roster, it's like, man, the Niners are stacked. They got you got Brock Purdy, his first full offseason as the starting quarterback. You got Debo and you got Ayuk. And then you got a first-round rookie to put on top of it. And then you got Christian McCaffrey. And then you got all these running backs, and you drafted a guy with 4.3 speed. And then Trent Williams, and all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, Trent Williams is 36 years old. He misses a couple games every year. Deebo Samuel and George Kittle play a certain style that they'll take on some contact, and they'll miss some games, and they'll miss some time here and there. And then Christian McCaffrey's a big one too. All of a sudden you lose him, and that can happen quickly. And we've seen it in 2018. We've seen it in 2020 when those injuries all kind of happen at the same time, and it wrecks your football team. So being deep is important, and the 49ers are probably the deepest they've been. Maybe offensive tackle aside, I'm still a little worried about tackle, although they did add a tackle because clearly I think they were hoping they could get something done in the draft at tackle. Didn't happen. They ended up signing, who was it? Who did they sign at tackle?
Oh my goodness. He played for the Titans. Good God. Yeah. Why? We do this for a living and we still don't remember. Like, God.
One of the things that happens, and look, my brain, I'll admit, is at capacity. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So if I learn 250 new prospects every spring, I'm going to lose old information, right?
Right.
So like I'm going to forget like the last couple of phone numbers that I remembered from the 90s. Like grandma's number's gone now. I'm gonna forget friends. I'm gonna forget that night, when we were 16 years old and we went down to the river and had so much fun. Right? I'm gonna forget that, and I'm gonna forget veteran names because I have to learn 250 new rookies and what their scouting reports are, and so that happens. That's a real thing. And I don't know about you, Jason, but my brain is clearly at capacity, and I've learned that, especially when it comes to draft coverage.
Well, good thing we have technology at our hands. Chris Hubbard is
There we go.
the offensive lineman that we
For sure.
added, and again, that puts you in a spot where you have competition. All of those things are good, and you do need depth when it comes to that. Obviously,
Yeah,
I
coverage.
feel like I say this all the time is that the two positions that have the largest drop off from starter to backup are offensive line and quarterback. I think that's where you're going to find that having a good backup isn't easy because there are so few linemen that can be counted on all the time. So 25 minutes in, guys, this is the Peacock and Aponte show, like that. See, and make sure you guys make sure you guys like and subscribe to both channels. This is streaming on Brian's channel and myself. We're going to be doing this weekly on Tuesday. So thank you guys for joining. We have about 150 people in here. Let's pivot a little bit, Brian. So PFF drops an article about the 25 best players under 25, if I'm not mistaken. Is that what it is? Okay. Take us through that.
They did
Yeah.
too. Yeah. And actually, by the way, to shout out another podcast with my name in the title, Peacock and Williamson NFL show, daily on the Locked On Podcast Network. We had John Costco of Pro Football Focus on the podcast on today's episode. He's the guy that wrote the 30 over 30 article. So they did two. They did the 30 top players over 30 years old and the top 25 players under 25 years old. 49ers had representation on both sides, more on the old side than the young side, which is another like kind of factor in all of this. When you start talking about last dances and Super Bowl windows, 49ers are a little bit of an older roster now in the NFL.
100%. Now let's put your memory to the test. I understand, we're at the top. Who's on both lists and you can start with whichever one.
Well, luckily, there's not very many people on the lists. So on the 30 over 30 list, the number one player is none other than Trent Williams.
Yeah.
And 36 years old, Trent Williams, still playing at a super high level, still 92 point whatever it was PFF grade. And if you're in the 90s at PFF, they love you because 65 is a pretty good grade in a lot of cases. There's a lot of starters out there in the 60s, 70s is really good. If you're in the 90s, and a couple of years ago, Trent Williams kind of broke their system, and he had ridiculous grades at Pro Football Focus. And I think maybe Penei Sewell passed him this year and might have been the only tackle, albeit not a left tackle, that had a higher grade than Trent Williams. So Trent Williams still playing at a super high level. But again, 36 years old, and you hope the wheels don't fall off for him. But, I mean, he's phenomenal, and he could play on one leg and be better than most offensive linemen in the NFL as long as his heart's still in it. And so hopefully that continues to be the case for him. But I think the biggest takeaway from the 30 over 30 list was George Kittle was number 4 on the list. So the Niners had two guys in the top 5. And you know who George Kittle was ahead of? Fellow NFL tight end Travis Kelce. And John Costco got some pushback. And he said, nope, my list, George Kittle's better because he is a good receiver and a great blocker. And Travis Kelce in the past has not been a great blocker, and his blocking grades actually went in the tank last year, and still phenomenal receiver. And obviously Travis Kelce's awesome, but this is football. It's not fantasy football out there. George Kittle, the better player, according to John Costco. So that was a fun conversation.
Yeah, and it's funny because PFF put out an article saying that the two strongest groups for the 49ers actually are the strongest groups in the NFL in tight end and linebacker. And tight end wasn't because of who's behind George Kittle. It was because of George Kittle for a lot of those same reasons, right? Like it was literally
they still don't have a lot of depth and can't figure out who tight end 2 is right now. I saw that too, and I was like, well, they got a lot of bodies, but it's George Kittle, and I don't know. Let's see. That's one of the better camp competitions, I think. And in all practicality, when they go 3 wide, tight end 2 is actually Juwan Jennings, in my opinion.
Right, and Ross Dwelly ain't walking through that door to save anybody.
Nope.
But it was linebacker, and obviously they were talking about that it was very close between the 49ers, the Jets, and the Ravens because they have phenomenal players as well. And we don't even know necessarily what's going to happen with Dre Greenlaw. And I think that's a little bit of it. But it was funny to see the 49ers having the strongest tight end room just based on the fact that they have what PFF and a lot of us consider as the best tight end in football. And I think that was really their reasoning more than anything.
I would actually, yeah, and that's very heavily weighted towards George Kittle. And when you look at the Kansas City Chiefs, they just drafted Wiley, in the third or maybe the high fourth round, and
Kittle, yeah,
no, yeah, the Chiefs
drafted.
drafted.
No, Kelsey, I'm sorry.
The Chiefs, I'm saying, drafted Wiley in the fourth round, and so to go with Kittle, I mean, that might be enough because I would take Wiley as tight end too for the 49ers. That might be enough to tip it back to the Chiefs' favor, even if you like Kittle more than Travis Kelce. So I'm wondering who they valued as the backup there. And I see in the chat, Braden Willis is maybe the one that they think is going to ball. So that'll be interesting. Braden Willis is an interesting player too, because 49ers love the way he played. He outplayed fellow rookie Cam Latu last year. He was on the field a little bit. He's got some H-back in him. Could he potentially be not only tight end two, but maybe the heir apparent to Kyle Juszczyk? Because I've heard some people say that, maybe Garendo's the heir to Kyle Juszczyk. Like, what would the post use? And I know we weren't planning on talking about this, but I wonder what you think about this, Jason. What would the post Kyle Juszczyk era look like? Because I don't know that Kyle Shanahan would just force any old fullback in. I think he likes Juszczyk because he's Juszczyk. If there's no Juszczyk, I wonder if that might point to more 3 wide receiver usage for the 49ers. And Kyle Juszczyk's actually replaced by a 5'8" wide receiver with 4.3 speed.
It's going to be very interesting when it comes to that, right? Like, is there going to be a pivot from ideology, right? Or are we going to seek out this fullback because we think it's that important to the offense? And it's going to be very interesting. And it ties in perfectly with what we're going to talk about here at the end. But it's going to be interesting how this season is going to set up the future for the 49ers. And that's kind of what we're talking about when we say last dance. And I think that's exactly what Brian's alluding to right now is you have Trent Williams and he's that old, and you have George Kittle and he's a little bit older, and now you have Juszczyk, and it feels like a turning point right now for the 49ers. So before we get into that, who are the players on the list for under 25?
It's just one, and it's Brock Purdy. And it's if you're going to have one, make it be your quarterback. And I mean, there's a lot of superstar young players on that list. But Brock Purdy, I think, comes in at number 8 on the top 25, under 25. One player ahead of is in between a couple of Jets. I think Sauce Gardner is 2. I know Penei Sewell is up there, and I think it's Garrett Wilson is right behind him at number 9. But yeah, it's the quarterback and really saving the 2022 draft. And in fact, a lot of people putting a lot of hopes in the 49ers draft. And I know, I'm sure this happens to you, Jason. I get some pushback sometimes. I used to do the shadow 49ers draft, and I just don't have quite as much time to dive as deep into the day 3 guys and really make picks as it's happening on day 3. And I'm at my son's, T-ball game now on a Saturday. And so I'm not going to sit there and watch the draft. I'm going to actually coach my son and be a good dad. So that I can't do the full shadow drafts anymore, but you always get the pushback. You're like, I didn't really care for this that much. And then you'll get the people who are like, I think they know a little bit more than you do about how to draft. And it's like, oh yeah, Ty Davis Price, Trey Sermon, they teams screw up and they do some weird things sometimes.
Yeah.
And the Niners have had such a good stretch of especially late round players, and they've been a little weird the whole time with first round guys. Some very hit and miss stuff there. But the last couple of drafts, 22 and 23, man, Brock Purdy saves that group because they had the fewest snaps in the NFL from their rookies in the 2023 class. And part of that is because, the McCaffrey trade, they didn't have a first or a second round pick, the McCaffrey trade and the Trey Lance trade. But the 2022 draft is looking pretty lean right now as well. That was the Drake Jackson class. But they found a star quarterback in round 7. So that saves everything.
100%. And again, he's costing them nothing, right? Like right now, to have top 10 quarterback play for pennies on the dollar is something that the 49ers have to take advantage of. And that's a perfect way to segue into this. So I wrote an article on Niners Nation and we ran a poll about, is this a last dance type season for the 49ers? And I phrased it properly and on purpose for this reason. Because it doesn't mean that the 49ers are not going to have a Super Bowl window past this season. But this current group of 49ers, based on age, based on contract, based on what's coming, It certainly feels like this is a turning point in which this draft class has to have guys who hit to be cheap, young contributors. Has to happen because you've missed on these other ones and you've gotten by because you have a very deep team. But this feels like there is going to be a bit of the faces are going to change, the jerseys are going to change. And I think Steve Young encapsulated it perfectly on 95.7 The Game. It never closes the window, but it narrows and it widens. And this current group, if it feels like if you want to see them get a ring, it has to be it feels like it has to be this season. That's what I mean by last dance in terms of not the 49ers organization, but this current group head up by Trent Williams and all these guys that are so top heavy and are the best the best at their position. It has to be this year if you want to see Trent get a ring.
I mean, it's clearly a better opportunity, right? And we just laid it out with, a 36-year-old Trent Williams and a running back who is actually, even older in football years in Christian McCaffrey with how much he's carried the ball and where he's at in his late 20s, approaching his 30s as well. Like that's not going to last forever. And they are phenomenal football players, two of the best in the entire NFL. And those guys are going to be gone. So clearly it's going to get worse for you there. Right now, you have an opportunity to play with both of your high-end wide receivers. One of those guys is probably going to be gone next year. So clearly, they're not going to have as good of a football team going forward unless they just go crazy and hit on some miraculous draft picks to replace them immediately. And it doesn't mean you're going to be a bad football team. But one thing they do have, which is why the window won't close, and I think it's a great analogy by Steve Young. And I think of like I've been golfing a lot. So I think of you stand up on the tee box, right? And sometimes there's just this, it looks great. There's this huge fairway and it's like, oh, I'm going to let it rip. I'm going to pull out my driver and just go for it. And sometimes you're like, I can't even take my driver out of the bag right now because I'm going to lose this golf ball. Right. And it could start to, that fairway could start to get pretty narrow for the 49ers in future years, but there's going to be a fairway there because what it looks like they have is the most important marriage you can have, which is coach and quarterback. And I think both those players are really good. And, argue about Brock Purdy all you want. We've seen a lot of 49ers football, Jason, and it looked different with Brock Purdy than everybody else in recent history. And you got to go back to Steve Young and Joe Montana to where it looked quite like that. Even with some really good years from Garoppolo, some really good years from Colin Kaepernick, some really good Jeff Garcia years. I've seen them all, and Brock Purdy's better than those guys. And Kyle Shanahan's a really good coach. Even with his warts, he's a phenomenal football coach. And then, okay, coach and quarterback, the most important thing you can have, the 49ers have it. What's next? Oh, you need a stud pass rusher to anchor your defense. Well, the 49ers have that too. So they have the building blocks to continue to build around going forward for a very long time. Those players are all young and should have phenomenal careers for a long time. And Kyle Shanahan's a young head coach as well. So as long as something unforeseen and those careers take an odd turn and there's some odd fork in the road that we don't know, they're set up to be a really good team going forward, but just not as good on paper as they are right now with potential all pros at almost every position group.
Yeah, it's hard to improve when you have the best left tackle in football, and this might be possibly his final season, and who knows what's going to happen with George Kittle with the way that he plays. And I think when we're talking about wide receivers moving, I think it's far more likely that Deebo Samuel is the one that moves based on the dead money and everything that they can clear out. And obviously, the Ayuk thing actually drops their cap number this season, but it will, depending on how they load that up. Then, of course, Brock Purdy is going to get paid the going rate. And that's not you getting upset at the player. It's the market. That's what it costs to have a quarterback, to be a starter, a top 10 guy. That's what it's going to cost. You look around at Jared Goff, you look around at some of the numbers being thrown around at some other guys, you have to feel like Brock Purdy is going to land in there, and deservedly so. So when you look at this team, when you're getting that type of production for that little, it feels like an opportunity might be missed if you don't finish the job, because there are going to be changes the next season. Now, it seems like the 49ers have insulated themselves moving forward, drafting 2 wide receivers, understanding that one, If not two receivers, Juwan Jennings and Deebo Samuel may not be here next year, hoping those guys can step in and be cheap for a little while, and you kind of reset the price and everything, and you reset the room a little bit. But this draft is imperative for the 49ers, like to get guys that are going to hit and be competent, young, impact players, right? And I think what a lot of people get misconstrued about this is it doesn't have to be all pro. Like it doesn't have to be all pro players. Starters in this league are very valuable. Potential impact starters are very valuable. So when you look at the name, and obviously you'll be projecting whatever that you think that these guys are going to do, and we have to actually see them play games first before we can really dig into that. But it does feel like this is just like the year that there is a little bit of a turning point. Who knows if Trent Williams wakes up at the end of the season? He's been playing a bunch of games all the way through the season. This is it for me. I don't want to do this anymore. And now the money becomes a situation with Brock, and you have to pay Ayuk, and what do you do with Hufanga? What happens when other guys are up for contracts? That's what makes this draft so important for the 49ers to find that cheap, young, impact talent.
And while they do have the coach, quarterback, defensive end combination going forward, those guys are expensive and make as much as any positions in the league at as far as what Purdy's probably going to make and what Nick Bosa makes. Then you're going to have one big time wide receiver contract, and you still are going to have. People talk about there's one name that's going to be around for a long time, and to me, and that's George Kittle. People talk about him being like, tight ends don't make enough. Like that's a drop in the bucket of what they would save moving on from George Kittle. Fred Warner is so important to the defense too, and linebackers, especially what Fred Warner's contract is right now compared to what some other linebackers are going to start making even at the high end. I don't think those are contracts you have to worry about, and I think they're when Trent Williams is gone and Deebo is gone, and the cap's going to go up, I think it'll make up for those. So I don't think they're going to go crazy and have to just lose everybody or anything like that. I think the big one's Deebo, and then, running back shelf lives are short. So we'll see how long Christian McCaffrey is able to hang around and have a career, even though running backs aren't paid that much either. He's, making half of what Deebo makes. And then, I think they're fine with their star players going forward. They just, the thing that is, I don't want to say it's frustrating, but I wonder, how do you find your offensive tackle, your next offensive tackle? How do you find the guy who's going to rush the passer and be dynamic opposite of Bosa, or a defensive tackle who's dynamic? Because those are first round guys, and they didn't draft a tackle or a pass rusher with their first couple of picks this year. And they're going to draft late next year too, right? And so where do you find that guy? You have to overpay for a guy who's probably not as good. You're going to get pretty lucky. There's not going to be another Trent Williams type of trade probably out there for you. So I think that's probably the biggest part of the plan going forward that I would say is going to be the toughest for the 49ers to navigate, is how do they find, like, they can find a safety, right? Like nobody's business. They could find a guard all day long, a center, whatever it is. Finding a true, like, really good offensive tackle, a difference-making pass rusher, defensive lineman, those things are much harder to find. And the 49ers in this draft, at least, weren't really willing to, draft and develop a younger player there. They went for more proven commodities at, more middle of the field positions that are a little bit easier to find, which is smart. And the 49ers have actually built a really good roster by attacking the middle of the field players, paying linebackers, running backs, tight ends, more money than the rest of the league, fullbacks. But eventually you're going to have to find those expensive positions on the outside. You're going to have to replace Charvarius Ward. You're going to have to replace Trent Williams. And those are expensive positions, and you don't want to have to overpay for somebody else's Mike McGlinchey either, because you didn't draft and develop one.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up Mooney Ward, because if Mooney Ward has another all-pro type season, he's going to want to get paid. Diamador Lenore is going to want to get paid. Like, these are guys that, while you're trying to build within the draft, you draft the Renardo Green, you bring in Isaac Gideon, Brock Yassin. Those guys kind of feel like veteran stopgaps in case something goes wrong. But the loss of a Mooney Ward and a Lenore drastically changes what this defense looks like. So, and Mooney's going to want to get paid. I mean, coming off a season in which he had a core muscle surgery at the end of the season, tells me he was playing through an injury for most of last season, or at the end of the season, and he was still damn good, and he's going to want to get paid what he's deserved as well too. So yeah, this really just boils down to a numbers game. And we don't know what the salary cap is going to jump up to. Hopefully there's someone else that can date another pop star that'll bring in more revenue to the NFL, that'll raise things a little bit more, but we don't know what it's going to look like. And again, the Ayuk deal would lower the salary cap for this year. We don't know how that will be structured. Obviously, a Brock Purdy extension puts things in a little bit of hyperdrive in terms of what you're paying the quarterback now. And usually when a quarterback does get paid and there is some loss of talent on the roster, you kind of look to your quarterback to say, hey, lift us a little bit more. We need you to play that way. So that's what makes this season so interesting. And then what's hurtful to hear Steve Young say is last year was your golden opportunity. I mean, you have the injury luck that was all on your side. You ran through, you had home field advantage. You had the lead. He's just like, that's such a missed opportunity. And then to say that on top of, if you want to see this current group win a Super Bowl, then it's got to probably be this year. And that's a little bit that is just like, it's hurtful.
That's where you start to get a little tight because, and even the Chiefs, that was probably the year to beat the Chiefs too.
Yes. And that's the worst Chiefs team. That was the worst Chiefs team they could have ran into easily.
And so that was a huge missed opportunity, and it would make I don't want to call it a rebuild, but a retool, the transition to whatever it's going to look like after this window that we're talking about from 2025 and beyond. It would be a lot easier and a lot smoother to transition to that if you have already hoisted a Lombardi. So that's why it feels so much more important to get it done this year. And if they would have done it last year, I think that would have made everyone a little bit looser and be like, okay, let's be prudent about this. Let's not screw up the future cap, and let's do it right. But if the 49ers don't win this year, then it's going to be like, oh man, okay, now we've got to trade future assets. We got to do whatever we can to be good again, because then we got to get it again, elongate the window, which hurts you in 2026, 2027. And then it starts to be a little bit more difficult to prolong this thing.
So short and sweet answer, is this the last chance for this 49ers current group?
Yes.
I think so too.
The current group.
So too. The current group.
Because there's going to be a good team in the future. It's just not going to have Trent and Christian McCaffrey and Juszczyk and Debo on it.
And that's what Steve Young said. The names on the jerseys are going to change, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the 49ers window going forward will be closed. So great discussion there. So let me ask you this. Based on after the draft and the way the offseason has gone, and combining signings and draft picks, what position group would you say the 49ers improved the most this offseason? On both sides of the ball?
Well, I think it's a combination of the defensive backfield, but I'll say corner, throwing it because Renardo Green's the highest drafted defensive back the 49ers have had in the Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch regime.
Since Jimmy Ward, right? So I think Jimmy Ward was the other high. Obviously, it wasn't in Kyle's time, but I think that's the last time the 49ers reached up that high.
Right, exactly. And so he's important. And so I kind of had a little side eye when Nick Sorensen said that they're going to start him out at nickel and start him out inside. And I was like, okay, you drafted a nickel in round 2 and you didn't draft an offensive tackle, team building wise. I've been wrong before, but it's a little weird. But maybe that might be a thing where he starts the nickel, could play outside when Ward moves on, and maybe that's more of a plan, sort of like when sometimes you draft a tackle, but he starts out at guard and then becomes your a tackle, and we'll see if that's the plan. Maybe with Pooney as well. Who knows? Maybe Pooney ends up being a starting tackle. Maybe Renardo Green ends up being starting on the outside. But they did need and they had an opportunity to add defensive backs that could impact early in their career. And I love Malik Mustafa. Thought he was a phenomenal pick in the 4th round. He doesn't have to start right away, but he can be someone that jumps into, a Jair Brown or a, even if you got to let go and you can't afford to pay Talanoa Hufanga, he could jump into that role. And I think he would be a good fit there and be a future starter if they need him to. And if not, be just a wild man on special teams and be a solid contributor and rotational guy in the meantime. And then Renardo Green's going to have an opportunity, and I would be probably shocked at this point if he doesn't earn top 3 cornerback billing early in the season, because if you're drafting 24-year-olds and they still need to sit a year, then why not draft the 21-year-old and coach him up, right? If the point is that you're drafting players who are more ready to play now, that are a little bit, because like the 49ers draft picks, if they have phenomenal rookie seasons, they won't be on the 25 under 25 list next year because they'll be 25 already in year two, right? All three of their first picks would be 25 years old in year two of their careers. So I'm looking for those first three picks to play early. And Juwan Jennings now might be opening the door a little bit more for Ricky Pearsall to get a few more targets as a rookie. And so, but Renardo Green, I'd see the cornerback position. They just didn't want Ambry Thomas out there anymore. So I think that's the position group that got helped the most this offseason. And obviously they added a couple of one-year guys as well to compete. And so you have tons of coverage there. Yeah. And it's probably going to be the best training camp battle as well for snaps with Rock Ya-Sin and Isaac Yadam to go along with the draft pick and Renardo Green.
Yeah. And it kind of just lends to the fact that Sorensen, defensive back guys, Staley, two safety high looks. I think they kind of are leaning a little bit towards, hey, let's get some coverage, right? Because in the Super Bowl, they're not going to call holding on our defensive linemen. We need guys who are going to be able to cover a little bit better. I mean, you don't want to be relying on Logan Ryan in the biggest game of the season, right? Like at times. So I agree 100% that it's corner and the secondary as well too. And I think on the other side of the ball for me, it's got to be wide receiver. Regardless, I have not seen Ricky Pearsall or Jacob Cowing play one snap. But I know that the drop-off after Juwan Jennings at times could be Ronnie Bell, Chris Conley, or Willie Snead. That is gone now. Like that, or Ray McLeod, like that's gone now. And I think if you're looking for, and we talked about it, I think we both believe that Deebo Samuel's probably going to miss a game or two just based on his physical nature and how it's gone. Now you don't fear the fact that Ray McLeod's got to run out there now, or Chris Conley's got to play a lot of snaps, or, you know, Willie Snead's out there or something like that in a pinch. You feel a little bit better about these young guys, even though you never have seen them play. So while that feels like a move and those two draft picks feel like a move for the future, I think it strengthens them today. And I think that's regardless of how many snaps they play, you feel much better about this wide receiver room after the top three dogs. And you feel better about what would happen if any of those guys were to miss time.
Yeah, and when you as Lee points out in the chat, wide receiver draft capital spent, and it's like, yeah, a first and fourth round pick to go with, you know, two Pro Bowl caliber guys that are the starters, and then you got third and Juwan as well. So it gets deep pretty quick there for the 49ers, and then, you know, coverage for injuries, and then obviously in the future, and it does take wide receivers some time. I just think that the guys they brought in at corner are going to have an opportunity for more snaps early. That's why I went there, but if there's an injury, that changes quickly, and there probably will be an injury at wide receiver because there has been multiple times in the past. It's different though too. Like, we kind of talked about what it would look like without Kyle Juszczyk, and like, let's say year, 2 years, whatever it is down the road, Kyle Juszczyk's gone. Brock Purdy's making $60 million per year, whatever it is. And Deebo Samuel's gone. So now you've got like speed in the slot. You've got Brandon Ayuk as your number one. And then you've got Ricky Pearsall as the Z receiver in place of Deebo. Very different guy for Deebo. You're not less gadgety stuff, less wide back stuff. That offense starts to look pretty different. Is there potential that Kyle Shanahan's going to call an offense where they throw the ball 100 more times a year? Like he might be forced to just because of the personnel he's putting together.
And I think that's something that you can easily come to as a conclusion when you look at them taking two wide receivers and understanding that Kyle talked about separation in the Super Bowl and getting separators. You're about to pay Brock Purdy coming off the year that he's had. Obviously, there's still room for improvement, which is scary for everybody for Brock Purdy. Why wouldn't you turn it over to the young man? Why wouldn't you get into a little bit more of a spread offense or an open offense and throw the ball a little bit more? You'll always have the running game. I think the running game is always going to be there because regardless of who's ever on the roster or whatever team it is, when Kyle's in there, that the offense can still run the football regardless. But yeah, it seems like you are pivoting and turning into something that's a little bit more spread out, a little bit more like we can get into a drop back passing game now, as opposed to creating things off the run with play action. Now we can just put it in the hands of our quarterback that we trust because now we've got separators and we've got a guy who understands exactly what he's looking at and is going to be very careful with the ball and is going to have another grasp of of the offense after this, off season. So yeah, 100%. It feels like this has to be a time where you kind of turn things over to Brock and you put the offense in his hands a little bit more.
Yeah, and if you're going to lean into the drop back passing game, you better figure out who those offensive tackles of the future are going to be to protect him if he's going to be holding the ball in the pocket a little bit more and attempting more passes. So a new era for sure. Like, and we talk about the last dance. It doesn't mean they can't continue to win, but it could start looking a lot different stylistically, how the offense is called, personnel wise. It could start looking a lot different very soon, starting in 2025 for the 49ers. And I love this group so much. I want them to win. Like I want that in the pocket. And then you can go forward with the best plan of attack that's best for the organization, knowing that you don't have to just go chase the ring at that point either. So that's why it's so important this season. And I don't know if you want to call it a last dance or whatever. That's why it's so important for the 49ers to go get that thing this year.
100%. And obviously nothing's guaranteed and there's a lot of luck that goes into it. But kind of what we were just talking about with like pivoting is like you look at the Kansas City Chiefs and when they had Tyreek Hill, they're throwing the ball down the field, they're threatening you down the field. And then, obviously because you have the quarterback and the play caller in unison and you have obviously the best quarterback, you turn into this dink and dunk offense and you're able to transition everything a little bit more. So based on personnel is how you're going to pivot. And if you start to get these guys who are separators and speed, it has to turn into a little bit more of passing because you want to see that value come to fruition. And it's just watching other guys like Mahomes went from just throwing it down the field to dink and dunk by 1,000 paper cuts, and they're still finding ways to win the Super Bowl. Sorry, guys. But yeah, this does feel like a transitional year. And I think this draft class, again, is pivotal for how they can sustain success moving forward as an organization.
I can't wait to see how it unfolds. And they're going to be up to the challenge. They're going to be one thing about it being such a veteran group that it wasn't in 2020 is remember the run it back year after the Super Bowl when they lost
revenge tour, baby.
Yeah, the revenge tour didn't quite happen and they got all hurt and it was a nightmare season in 2020. This team feels a lot more ready to I don't know what the word is. They're a lot more ready to not get too wrapped up in playing the season beyond what's in front of them. It's a veteran group. They've been through this before and they're ready to play it out in a more veteran way that I think will benefit this team that I think they ran into a little bit of a problem with that 2020 team, including John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan themselves, who have kind of felt the same way. They're a little too amped up. And it's a long season, right? And so I think they're more prepared for that run it back revenge tour to try to go back and win a Super Bowl after losing one than they were last time.
Yeah, revenge of the revenge tour 2.0, whatever it is that you want to call it. I'm tired of these sayings. Get rid of Quest for 6, get rid of revenge tour. We should just change it to win the damn thing, finish the damn job already.
Oh yeah, can we get the quest for 7, like the siesta for siete? I don't know what you want to call it, but something else. Like no more revenge, no more quest for 6. Let's get past it, guys.
Run it back 4.0. Al says, hey, Brian, this is great. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Brian, tell everybody where they can find all your stuff and what you got going on.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at BD Peacock. I'm doing Locked On 49ers with my guy Eric Crocker every single day. You can find it on YouTube, all of your audio apps, Locked On 49ers every day on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm doing a podcast every day on Locked On about the entire NFL as well. Peacock and Williamson with my co-host Matt Williamson, former NFL scout, former ESPN guy. And you can find that in the same places you can find this pod, the same places you can find Locked On 49ers. And it's just for fun, since I wasn't doing enough podcasts and since the world needs more podcasts, Jason, I launched Overtime just for some extra conversations about whatever I feel like, but it's been all about the 49ers there as well. Overtime with Brian Peacock, OT with BP. You can find that's YouTube only. Make sure you're subbed up there as well. And always a pleasure, Jason. Let's keep doing it, man. Home and home. Let's get this going.
Hell yeah. I mean, we're not going to say anything about, you slamming my Yankees or anything like that, any chance that you get. But hey, I mean, let's just keep
the Giants hat, because
I figured
there was going to be some Yankees BS happening on the other side of the screen. So I had to kind of level that out.
You know how I talk about baseball is if your team's winning, we're so back. If your team's losing, not a real sport. And the Yankees kicked away a 4-run lead to the Seattle Mariners, and I was like, oh, well, I'll be damned. Baseball's not a real sport again. So, I go up and down with it.
Yeah, I was at the game Sunday. Giants beat the Rockies. It was a fun one. My 5-year-old though had an opportunity. It was Little League Day at the park, so he was able to run the bases, go on the field.
That's awesome.
And so that was a lot of fun, and something I didn't get to do at Candlestick when I was a kid. So I was kind of jealous. I was like, "Can the adults run on the field?" And they're like, nope, 5-year-olds only." So there we go. Had a good time at the yard. Giants aren't the greatest team right now, but that's not going to stop me. And you know what? It's cool because I love sports, and I played a lot of sports. I played a lot more baseball than I did football. Football has become a job in a way that it doesn't make me like the sport less, but I'm less of a fan now because I'm more of a journalist, and I kind of have that journalistic integrity, and I don't root for football as hard as I used to, but I can just I'm just a fan when it comes to baseball again. It's just like, I'm just a little kid when I go to the yard, and so it's a lot different to go catch a different sport now, especially now that I've done this for so long covering the NFL.
Yeah, baseball is my excuse to day drink during the summer. I think that's the perfect way to end this. So, guys, make sure you guys like this video. Subscribe to Brian's YouTube channel as well, too. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't. A like helps us out a lot. Helps push us up in the algorithm as well. We're going to be doing this, it looks like, every Tuesday. So if you guys keep enjoying it, leave a comment, and anything that you want us to talk about, we'll get to it. So, for Brian, for Jay, let's get out of here. Peace. Welcome, everybody. Let's go Niners. My name is Jason Aponte.